Max Verstappen's teammates can't win, or at least they can't win against him consistently. Some have been a small margin behind him and others a massive margin. But is he really driving that much faster? If so, how does he do it? And is the Red Bull really designed especially for him?
He is very quick.
Max has been in Formula 1 for 9 seasons, across 2 or really 1 team, and has had 5 teammates. Max joined F1 with Toro Rosso in 2015, being teammates with Carlos Sainz. He was, and still is, the youngest driver ever to start a Grand Prix at 17 years old. At the time, it was also Sainz's first season in F1 and at Toro Rosso. And although both of them were starting their careers in Formula 1, it makes for a fair comparison. 2016 initially continued alongside Sainz at Toro Rosso, but by the 5th Grand Prix of the year, he'd moved to Red Bull.
Already many, as you know, I made a switch to Red Bull Racing.
And was now up against the vastly more experienced and very quick Daniel Ricciardo, who was in his 5th full season in F1. I'm sure we all remember that first race and the first win for Max in Spain.
The beautiful trophy here, I'm very proud of it.
After the 2 Mercedes took each other out. That's my impression of Hamilton. And ever since then, Max has been at Red Bull, although his teammates have changed fairly frequently. Ricciardo stuck around in 2017 and 2018 before leaving for Renault.
I am driving with the Renault F1 team.
Then in 2019, Gasly arrived at Red Bull, and now it was Max's turn to be the more experienced driver. Pierre was heading into only his 2nd full year in F1, whereas Max was now going into his 5th. But Gasly only lasted 12 races at Red Bull before being demoted back to Toro Rosso, being replaced by Alex Albon for the rest of the season. Now, it's worth noting that 2019 was Albon's first year in F1, and again, it was Max's 5th. So, a challenging situation for Albon to say the least. Albon then stayed at Red Bull in 2020 before being replaced by Sergio Perez for 2021. And this is where the experience balance shifts slightly again. 2021 was Sergio's 11th year in Formula 1 and Max's 7th. But honestly, once you're a few years in, the experience shouldn't really make a huge difference, especially in comparing a 7th year and 11th year driver. However, to be fair to Perez, moving team would make a bigger difference. And since 2021, Perez has been at Red Bull and will continue throughout 2024, probably. So before we get into the driving, what does the data actually show? Is Max really that much faster? Well, I found some data that's been put together by Give010 on Reddit, and it compares teammates across qualifying lap time, qualifying position, and race position. Now, data like this can never paint the full picture of what's actually happened during a race weekend. There's always a wider story. But the data does remove results where a teammate didn't finish or qualifying was wet. Again, it's not perfect, but there's enough data to point us in the right direction. But first, would you like to drive a real ex-Kimi Raikkonen F1 car? Well, before we get into who was Verstappen's best teammate, let me tell you about our competition where you can win an all-expenses-paid trip to Paul Ricard to have a day driving an F4 car and an F1 car with coaching from me. We've already had 3 winners who've seriously had the experience of a lifetime driving the F1 car. Tickets are very likely to sell out, so enter now at experience.driver61.com, and entries are open to people living in the UK, Europe and the USA. And we now accept Visa and MasterCard. If you enter, good luck, and maybe I'll see you in France. So let's start with pure speed, qualifying pace. The gap to Sainz was very close, with Verstappen being 0.06% faster across their time as teammates. However, there are a couple of outlier results where Verstappen was more than a second faster, which will of course affect that average. Overall, it was tight, with Verstappen beating Sainz 12-11 in qualifying. Next, we have Ricciardo, and this is where we have the most data, over 50 races as teammates. And their absolute pace was pretty close. But overall, Verstappen was 0.11% faster than Ricciardo in qualifying, with Max beating Daniel 34-24 times in those sessions. Okay, so Sainz and Ricciardo were a bit slower in qualifying, but not by much. However, from here on in, things change a lot. Up against Gasly, who was in his first full year in F1, Verstappen outqualified him 11-1 and was more than 0.5% faster. To put that into perspective, the qualifying time around Silverstone that year was a 1 minute 25. So using the average difference of 0.54%, that means that Gasly on average would have been more than 4.5 tenths slower on a circuit of this length. We quickly then move on to Albon, only 12 races into his Formula 1 career. Alex and Max had 26 races as teammates, and Verstappen outqualified him 25 times. And Alex had the biggest time difference of all the teammates at 0.62%. And finally, we have Sergio Perez. 3 seasons together so far, with 58 qualifying wins to Verstappen and only 7 to Perez, with an average time difference of 0.46%. And of course, it's not just the outright qualifying pace where Verstappen is quick. It's also the races. When comparing relative finishing position when both drivers actually finished the race, Verstappen beat Sainz 54% of the time, Ricciardo 60% of the time, Gasly 90% of the time, Albon 89% of the time, and Perez 88% of the time. So these stats are pretty wild. And even if you're not the biggest Verstappen fan, you have to admit, like with Hamilton, Vettel, Schumacher before him, these stats are impressive. But for me, one of the most impressive things about Verstappen, again, like with all the great drivers before him, is that he was quick as soon as he got in an F1 car. Granted, he was up against another rookie with Sainz in year 1, but when he first went to Red Bull, he was up against a proven, very fast Daniel Ricciardo, who'd been in the sport for 4.5 years and had recently beaten the 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel in the 2014 season. And remember, Verstappen won his first ever race with Red Bull in the 5th race of the season at the Circuit de Catalunya after he'd moved from Toro Rosso. Just think about that for a second. There's so much to learn about a car, especially at this level, and Verstappen came in, adapted to the car, and beat a very fast teammate, all when he was only 18 years old. We saw the same with Hamilton in his first year in 2007, going up against world champion Alonso, just about beating him and almost winning the entire championship. I think we all remember that one. And we saw the same with Schumacher, Vettel, Alonso, and many more. Even if the drivers aren't battling for podiums straight away, they come in and outperform their cars and pretty much destroy their teammates. But there's no doubt that Verstappen was a bit rough around the edges at the start of his F1 career. And that's probably to be expected. After all, he was only 17 years old. He did crash a bit and people spoke about him being too aggressive. But again, that happens with all the future world champions. The important thing at the beginning is that they're quick out of the box. Then with time, the driver becomes more experienced, more refined with their technique, and don't crash into other drivers or fall off the circuit quite as much. In fact, Ricciardo said that he thought a lot of that maturing was done in 2018. He said, "I think he definitely took a step. I think it was the last year I was with him in 2018. The first 5 or 6 races, he was in the wall a lot, having incidents or making mistakes, mostly on his behalf. Then through that year, it was like he just had a bit of self-realization and a step of maturity, which is also natural. We all go through it. I honestly think that from the middle of that season on, he became a more complete driver. And we see that experience kicking in when we compare Verstappen to his teammates. When he was less experienced against Sainz and Ricciardo, they were closer to him. But as he became more experienced and the team leader, Gasly, Albon and Perez just couldn't get anywhere close. Lando Norris was interviewed recently and put it nicely.
He's in a team which he's very comfortable in. A lot of things are, built up around him. So for anyone, even a Max of a few years ago, to go in against the Max of now is extremely difficult.
Max knows how Red Bull works and they know how he works, and these things make a huge difference, which is part of the reason why Perez, when coming into Red Bull, has struggled. Although if he was ever going to beat Verstappen, he would have at least gotten close by now. Verstappen is now the driver with most race starts at Red Bull. So with all that experience at the team, it's difficult to see anyone coming in and beating him. And this is one of the reasons that Lando gave for not wanting to drive at Red Bull.
Even if you enter a team, are you in a position to challenge someone straight away and comfortable to do that? And I think it's a no for any driver.
So what about the car? Is it made around Verstappen? Well, I recently watched the High Performance podcast with Alex Albon, which if you haven't watched, you should check it out. In this interview, Alex was very open about his time as teammates with Max, and he answered a few questions. First, is the car really built around Max?
A lot of people say that car is built around him. He's created this team around him, but truthfully, the car is what it is.
However, Alex then goes on to say,
He has quite a unique driving style, actually. It's not that easy to get along with.
this to me sounds like he was trying to drive a car that was more suited to Max. What we don't know is whether the car was designed around Max or whether it just ended up that way because that's how Red Bull decided it was best to do it. But what about the specific driving style? How does Max get so much speed out of the car?
His level of sharp and direct is kind of another, it's a whole different level. It's eye-wateringly sharp.
And we've heard this before. You can see it somewhat in the onboard footage that Max likes a pointy car. But the issue with the onboards is that they only show if the car is understeering or oversteering, but not how much the driver is needing to control it. For example, you might have a very pointy car that wants to slide at the rear a lot, but the driver, in order to get the most out of the car, doesn't allow it to slide too much. So as a viewer, you can't see to what degree it's pointy. And I just want to say thank you to Alex for giving us this insight. I think he's the first driver to speak in such detail about the relative differences in driving technique. And it seems, as with the other teammates, Alex struggled with such a pointy car.
It becomes so sharp that it makes you a little bit tense.
What Alex means here is that he'd be nervous about turning the car into the corners, probably especially in high-speed turns, because the rear would be so lively and because it stands a high chance of sliding and the car spinning.
For you to catch up, you have to start taking a little bit more risk. You might be a couple tenths behind one session. Just try a little bit more. Okay, I've gone off. I've had a crash. So then you've got to restart. Then you've lost a little bit of confidence. It takes a little bit more time. That gap's growing a little bit, and then the next time you try and go out and do another job, another spin or another whatever.
And it's these mistakes, the inability to predict how the car is going to react, and then the drop in confidence that starts this whole downward spiral. In the end, the drivers, especially in the races, have to lower the risk. They have to drive below the car's limit, which of course is better than ending up in the wall.
Every time you go into a corner, you don't know how it's going to react. You don't have that kind of, it's purely the confidence in the car.
Meanwhile, Max is happy with his setup. He's made very few, if any, mistakes, and he's full of confidence. And he's been doing that all weekend, all season, for many seasons. That's why there's such a difference between Max and his teammates, and why, for the moment, I can't see any teammate beating him. Max is also one of the best sim racers in the world. If you'd like to find out how he's so quick, click the video just here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.